If you have already watched the video on e-receipts, you'll find that much of the next couple of minutes are the same, and that's because the setup process is the same. I apologize for repeating here if you've already heard it, but it's here for those who are starting with this video about pledge acknowledgements. Pledge acknowledgements, both printed and emailed, are intended to be a one-time pledge statement that is sent as part of the pledge setup process. It is simply a thank you and a confirmation of the pledge. If you wish to update your donors periodically on the status of their pledges, a better option are pledge statements. The first step in the process is to set up an ePledge acknowledgement template. It is a separate template from your printed acknowledgement template, although it can look similar. Synergy staff will work with you to set up your template. It is important to remember that the ePledge acknowledgement is an emailed statement that the donor will receive in their email and may or may not print out. It is not a printed statement that will be emailed as an attachment. Since the donor is responsible to print out the email, the look of the statement will depend on their ability to print from their email program. Therefore, it's a good idea to keep the layout simple. The goal is to provide them with an acknowledgement and a thank you message. Denari determines which donors will get printed or emailed statements based on that donor's preference, and that can be selected by you internally, or the donor can make that selection through their online community account. So the next step is to set up the preferences for each donor, but first you must decide what your philosophy will be toward acknowledgements. One option is to decide that all donors with an email address will get ePledge acknowledgements, whether they state that as their preference or not. Or you could decide that all donors will get printed statements unless they tell you differently. We can set the global setting for either of those policies when setting up your template, and it can be changed later if needed. If no preference is set for a donor, Denari will default to the global setting. Let's assume now that all of your donors will get printed statements unless they tell you they want the email version. Once you know their preference, you're ready to set them up, and it's fairly simple. Click on the Names link here on the left, and then Name List Management, and search for and select the donor's name record. I'll just select one that's here. From there, click on e-correspondence emails here on the right, Now, if they don't already have an email address here, click on Add New to create a new one. I'll select an address that is already here. First, fill in the email address and choose a status. New here simply means that this email address has never been used by Denari to send an email. Once that happens, it will change to active, and you can set it to active here if you'd like. The last thing you need to do here is hit the Make Primary button on the upper right section of the page. That will cause this email address to be the one that Denari uses for e-receipts. The primary button doesn't appear here unless there is an address that is not already primary. Now click Save. Now we can set the preference by selecting e-correspondence preferences on the right. We'll select the email address that we want to use for ePledge acknowledgements, and then also choose a delivery method. And again, click the Save button. From now on, Denari will not produce a printed statement when you run pledge acknowledgements for this donor. Running ePledge acknowledgements uses the same process as printed statements. First, you will have to check the Queue for Acknowledgement checkbox in the donor's pledge record and select a letter there. Let's look at that. Again, we can click on Names and then Name List Management and select the name record. I'm just going to go ahead and click on Pledges since we're already here. If there's already a pledge here, you can just go ahead and use that, or you can click Add New to create a new one if needed. I'm going to go ahead and click the one that's here. Typically, you will set up the pledge for the acknowledgement at the same time you're setting up the pledge, since it's intended to be a one-time acknowledgement of their pledge. But you can do this whenever you'd like. We'll scroll down the page to the Queue for Acknowledgement field and check that box. Now we select an acknowledgement letter. When you run the acknowledgements, either printed or emailed, Denari will print statements from those pledges with the box checked. It will use the letter you've selected as the letter body portion of the statement. There's also a slight variation from this, which we'll describe in a few minutes. Once the pledges are queued for acknowledgement, you're ready to print the statements. For that, we'll click on the email button here on the left and then Pledge Acknowledgements. Running the statements can be done in one of two ways. Simply clicking the Submit Request button here on the right without selecting a pledge segment or starting and ending dates causes Denari to create a statement for every pledge with the Queue for Acknowledgement box checked back in the pledge. It will also uncheck those boxes at the same time. Remember, I said earlier, the acknowledgement is intended to be a one-time statement. So now you can set up new pledges and run statements for those without having to go back and uncheck the boxes for those pledges you've already acknowledged. But you do have an alternative. You can choose either a pledge segment here or starting and ending date to select the pledges for statements. You can't use both, use one or the other. You can then get acknowledgements for those pledges identified by your filter. Denari does not uncheck the Queue for Acknowledgement box in the pledge record when you're using the filters. With either method, once you click the Submit Request button at the top of the page, Denari does not begin sending emails. It only creates the job that will be waiting for your approval. This gives you a chance to review the statements before they're sent. To approve them, you'll click the email button here on the left again. And now e-correspondence job queue. You will find the jobs here that are waiting for approval. Under the View column, you'll see the link that says View Job. Click the link to review the statements in that job. Once you're satisfied that the job is ready to go, you can click anywhere in that row to open the approval form. Simply enter the approval code and then click Approve Job. The emails are now being sent and there's no going back. They can't be retrieved at this point. So where do you get the approval code? We'll click the email button again on the left and then e-correspondence control record. In the authorization information section, you'll find the link to change the code. Click that, enter the new code or password, and then click the Change Password button. Sometimes there is a problem with an email address that causes that email to bounce. When that happens, you'll sometimes get an email telling you that your email to a specific person has been returned or bounced. Sometimes, though, you may not get the bounce notification email. So how do you know when email has bounced and who are the donors? Let's click on the Email tab again. And then we'll click on the Smart Email Dashboard. Here in the upper left-hand corner, you see a list of jobs that are waiting for approval. You can approve them and run them from here just as you did on the e-correspondence page. It does the same thing. Below that, you find the Recent Jobs section. This will list jobs that have been recently sent. And notice the columns. You have Sent On, Sent, Bounces, and Resend Bounces. When there's a job listed here, you'll find a number in the Bounce column that shows how many bounces there were from that job. You can click the link to that job to see a report showing other information about the job. You can also click on the number in the bounce column itself. It is a link that will produce a report showing the donors whose statements have bounced. Of course, you can click on the numbers field in the other other fields for information related to those fields as well. You also have here a resend link that appears when there are bounces. Clicking that will resend that statement. Of course, depending on the original problem that caused it to bounce, it may bounce again. This concludes this video on ePledge acknowledgements. If you have any questions, please contact tech support through the help button at the top of the Denari page.